My wife cheated on me, filed for a divorce, and laughed on my face until the judge revealed my net worth. I, 31M, never thought I'd be posting on a forum like this, but my life completely blew up about 48 hours ago. My wife of 6 years, Chloe, 30F, served me divorce papers at the dinner table, literally laughed in my face, and told me I was a financial deadweight. I'm sitting in a cheap motel room writing this, and I just need to get it all out. To give you some background, Chloe and I have been together since our mid-20s. On paper, we look like total opposites. I'm a remote software QA tester and do some freelance development. I've always been a low-maintenance guy. I wear faded hoodies, buy my clothes off the rack, and drive a beat-up 2012 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door. Chloe, on the other hand, works in high-end corporate PR. She is all about appearances. She surrounds herself with a very affluent, superficial crowd, and she's always cared deeply about status symbols, designer bags, and what neighborhood we lived in. Because my daily routine didn't involve wearing a tailored suit or bringing home a massive monthly corporate bonus, she and her friends always treated me like I was just barely scraping by. For the last 2 years, the dynamic in our marriage shifted from partners to something miserable. Chloe started treating me less like a husband and more like a live-in roommate and a personal servant. She stopped asking about my day. Instead, she'd come home from networking events and openly drop hints about how she deserves a man who can actually provide a luxury lifestyle. She'd talk about her co-workers' husbands who took them to Tulum or the Maldives while looking at me with total disdain. I stayed through all of it. I genuinely loved her, and I kept telling myself that she was just stressed from work and that we were just going through a rough patch. I thought if I kept supporting her and doing the cooking and cleaning, she'd come around. I was an idiot. 2 days ago, I came home about 3 hours early because a client meeting got canceled. The house was quiet, but as I walked upstairs, I heard Chloe laughing in the bedroom. She was on speakerphone with her friends, bragging. I stood frozen outside the door as I heard her talk about her new executive crypto bro boyfriend, Brad. She was literally telling them how much better in bed he was and how Brad was going to rescue her from her boring, broke life. My heart dropped into my stomach. I pushed the door open. She didn't even flinch. There was no guilt, no panic, no apologies. She just hung up the phone, walked over to her vanity, and handed me a thick manila envelope. It was pre-drafted divorce papers. When I started getting emotional and asked how she could do this after 6 years, she actually laughed out loud. It was the cruelest sound I've ever heard. She looked at me and said, "Oh, please, don't do the pathetic puppy dog routine. You can keep your junk car and your little video games. I'm taking the house, I'm filing for maximum alimony, and Brad is moving in next week. Honestly, you're lucky if you can even afford a studio apartment on your pathetic salary." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at her, signed the initial acknowledgement papers calmly, packed a single duffel bag, and walked out to my Civic. But here's the thing Chloe doesn't know. I am not broke. Not even close. 7 years ago, right before I met her, I was an early employee at a tech startup. I was given a massive chunk of equity. 2 years into our marriage, that company went public. On top of that, my eccentric grandfather passed away and left me a massive, quietly managed trust fund. Because I've always valued a simple life and wanted a partner who loved me for who I am, not my bank account. I kept my finances entirely separate in a private wealth management account. I lived off my modest freelance income, let her think I was just getting by, and quietly paid off our entire mortgage through an anonymous LLC so she'd think we just got a great deal from the bank. She thinks she is about to absolutely ruin me in court and take me for every penny she thinks I don't have. My state has a mandatory, strict financial disclosure phase before the first preliminary hearing, which is coming up next week. Update. Wow, I didn't expect my last post to blow up the way it did. Thank you to everyone for the supportive messages, the legal tips, and the sheer amount of validation. To answer a few of the top questions from the comments. Yes, my state has an ironclad premarital asset exemption, but we also have a strict mandatory financial disclosure rule. And no, she has absolutely no clue about my secondary accounts. I always handled our joint bills from my freelance check, so to her, that small account was all I had. Before we got anywhere near a courtroom, Chloe went into full villain mode. She launched an absolute smear campaign against me. She sent a massive, multi-paragraph text message to my parents, my siblings, and even a few of my old college friends, claiming that I was a lazy, emotionally unsupportive husband who refused to provide for her or grow up. On Instagram, she started posting these incredibly smug stories with captions about finally choosing happiness, leaving the deadweight behind, and upgrading my life. She even posted a picture of a high-end restaurant table showing 2 wine glasses, obviously hinting at Brad. Her friends, who always looked down on me anyway, started sending me nasty paragraphs telling me to just sign the papers, act like a man for once, and stop dragging your feet. I didn't reply to a single one. I blocked them all, saved the screenshots, and let them think they were winning. Instead of arguing, I went out and hired a top-tier, incredibly aggressive divorce attorney named Arthur. When I sat down in Arthur's office and laid out my actual financial portfolio, which sits at roughly $4.7 million split between liquid high-yield accounts, index funds, and tech stocks, he literally leaned back in his chair and smiled. He told me that since the vast majority of this wealth was generated from premarital startup equity and an inherited trust that was never commingled into a joint account, Chloe had absolutely no legal claim to it. Arthur's strategy was genius. He instructed me to strictly adhere to the legal discovery process, but told me we were going to submit my true financial affidavit exactly at the absolute midnight deadline the day before the preliminary hearing. This was completely legal, but it gave Chloe's legal team zero time to actually review the numbers or prepare a counter-strategy before we stood in front of the judge. Meanwhile, Chloe's greed completely blinded her. Her lawyer filed an aggressive list of demands. They wanted the house, which her parents had helped with a small 10% down payment on, but I had secretly paid off the entire remaining mortgage under a private LLC to surprise her later. They also demanded 60% of my known meager savings and a ridiculous amount of maximum monthly spousal support because, as her lawyer wrote, she had become accustomed to a certain standard of luxury living that the husband was now trying to deprive her of. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, and the courtroom atmosphere was thick with tension. Chloe arrived dressed to the nines in a designer blazer, looking incredibly smug and flanked by her high-priced attorney. She wouldn't even look at me, acting like I was a piece of trash she'd finally swept out of her life. To make things even more absurd, Brad, the crypto bro boyfriend, was actually sitting in the back row of the gallery, wearing a tailored suit and grinning like he'd already won the lottery. I showed up in my usual modest, off-the-rack suit, looking tired, quiet, and completely unassuming. The judge was an old-school, no-nonsense guy named Judge Miller. He took his seat, adjusted his robe, and started reviewing the submitted financial disclosures. Chloe's lawyer immediately stood up and gave this grand, theatrical speech about how I was a financial drain on his client, how Chloe had carried the marriage, and how I needed to be penalized for forcing her to live in near poverty due to my lack of ambition. While the lawyer was ranting, I watched Judge Miller flip to my financial affidavit. Suddenly, the judge stopped reading. He put down his glasses, rubbed his bridge of his nose, and stared directly at Chloe's lawyer. Then he looked over at Chloe. The courtroom went quiet. Judge Miller leaned forward and asked Chloe's lawyer, "Counselor, have you and your client actually reviewed the defendant's submitted certified bank and brokerage statements?" Chloe's lawyer looked caught off guard. He stumbled over his words, cleared his throat, and said, "Your Honor, we received the digital files very late last night. Given the defendant's historic income, we assumed it was just standard boilerplate documentation and haven't had the chance to audit it yet. But, well, you should have," Judge Miller interrupted, his voice echoing in the silent room. He picked up my affidavit, looked straight at Chloe, and read the numbers out loud. According to these verified, audited assets from a certified private wealth firm, Mr., my last name, holds a personal, separate net worth of $4.7 million. The immediate aftermath was pure poetry. The courtroom went dead, icy silent. I turned my head slightly to look at Chloe. Her jaw literally dropped. It was like watching the color drain out of someone's face in real time. The smug, arrogant look she had worn for months completely vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. She looked at me, then frantically turned to her lawyer, who was suddenly sweating and frantically flipping through his paperwork, tearing through the pages we had submitted the night before. I glanced back at Brad, and his stupid grin was completely gone. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Judge Miller slammed his gavel down once and looked at Chloe's trembling legal team. This court will take a 15-minute recess so the plaintiff's counsel can actually read the documents before making any more baseless claims about financial deprivation. As the judge walked out, Chloe just sat there, staring at me like she didn't even know who I was. Final update. The moment Judge Miller stepped out of the courtroom for the recess, Chloe practically tripped over her own designer heels trying to corner me in the hallway. Her expensive lawyer was trying to hold her back, but she blew right past him. The mocking laughter, the smugness, the condescending smirk, it was all completely gone. Her face was flushed, and she looked utterly desperate. She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back. She immediately started trying to spin the narrative. Why didn't you tell me, babe? For $0.7 million? Why would you hide that from me? We're a team. We're supposed to build a life together. I was just hurt and acting out because I thought you weren't trying for our future. We can work through this, I swear. I just looked at her. For 6 years, I had loved this woman, but looking at her shaking in that hallway, all I felt was profound disgust. I looked her dead in the eye, kept my voice perfectly calm, and said, "You didn't want a team, Chloe. You wanted a paycheck. And the second you thought I didn't have a big enough one, you laughed in my face, handed me divorce papers, and brought another man into our bed. We are completely done." When we walked back into the courtroom, the legal backfire began, and it was brutal. Arthur, my attorney, went to absolute work. Because of our state's specific laws regarding marital misconduct and the fact that Chloe had already legally moved Brad into the house, her demands for alimony were declared instantly dead in the water due to cohabitation rules. But Arthur wasn't finished. He produced bank statements proving that Chloe had been using our joint account, the one I funded with my freelance work, to buy expensive designer gifts, dinners, and weekend trips for Brad. It was a textbook case of dissipation of marital assets. Faced with a mountain of evidence, Chloe's lawyer knew they were utterly defeated. Arthur made it clear that if they didn't settle immediately, we would go to a full, public trial. Since Chloe worked in high-end corporate PR, a public record of her fraud, infidelity, and financial greed would have completely destroyed her career. To protect her job, she was forced to sign a settlement right then and there. The terms were beautiful. I got the house back entirely, since Arthur proved it had been paid off using my separate, premarital funds via the LLC. Chloe got absolutely zero alimony, didn't touch a single cent of my millions, and because of her bad faith filings and hidden dissipation of funds, the judge ordered her to pay for 100% of my legal fees. The fallout after that was swift. Predictably, Brad, the big shot crypto bro, showed his true colors. The second he realized Chloe wasn't getting a multi-million-dollar divorce payout and was instead swimming in debt from her own legal fees, he packed his bags and dumped her within a week. He was just a gold digger who thought he'd hit the jackpot. Chloe was forced to move out of our home and into a cramped, noisy studio apartment on the bad side of town. Ironically, the exact life she told me I'd be forced to live. To make it sweeter, her parents found out the truth about why the marriage ended. They were absolutely furious at her for throwing away a wealthy, stable, and loving husband out of sheer arrogance and superficial greed. She tried texting me from a burner number a few days ago, begging to just talk over coffee, but I blocked it without reading past the first sentence. As for me, I sold the house last month. I didn't want the memories anymore. I packed up my 2012 Honda Civic, took my assets, and bought a beautiful, modern cabin surrounded by acres of pine trees up in the Pacific Northwest. I still wear my faded hoodies, and I still play my video games, but now I do it from a deck looking out at the mountains.